Hi everyone, welcome back to my lab and today's video, which is going to be my review and demo of the Natasha Denona Safari palette. I've had it for several weeks and I've gotten to know her really well, and I'm ready to share those opinions with you. Before we get started with the video, if you're new here, I'm Yori and I post mostly reviews about all my favorite makeup products. I would love for you to subscribe and join my makeup family. Now without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. I ordered my Safari palette from Beautylish. Right now this palette is currently listed as being limited edition, but we know how limited edition goes. For now it is listed as limited edition, so I wanted to let you know. The price of it is $129 and I ordered it from Beautylish on the day of launch. I've gotten a chance to use absolutely every single shade in the palette, and I have a pretty good idea of who would prefer a palette like this and who might not. The outer packaging of the palette is really reminiscent of the Tropic palette, with the exception that this packaging is a little bit matte. If you look at the Tropic palette, you can see that the plastic is a little more reflective. I do really like this packaging, although I don't think that she's going to make it permanent, because now she's coming out with her gold palette and that one is back to the same packaging as the Lila and Sunset palette. But I do like this packaging. I think it's a really nice upgrade for her. It's very hard plastic. On the back side, you do have these slots where you can poke through and remove the eyeshadows. So if you're the type that likes to reorganize eyeshadow palettes, then I think that you would really enjoy that. Also, if you want to create a magnetic palette to travel with, since this one is a little bit big and bulky and a little bit heavy as well, I think that's a really nice option to have. When you open up the palette, you do have a very nice large mirror, and the inside of the palette looks like this. When the palette was first teased, we only saw the outside of the palette, and so as you can see, it's sort of an olive green finish. And with a name like Safari, I was kind of anticipating a lot of green, and as you can see, when you open it, there's not much green at all. There's 15 shades total, and it is an all matte palette. I'm going to insert swatches of everything, no primer, no nothing, just my fingers on my bare skin so you can get an idea of how the shades swatch. To be honest, they don't swatch all that well, but they perform on the eye really well. As I said, I've used absolutely every single shade and have some opinions on all of them. I will insert those swatches while we're chatting. The eyeshadow formula in this palette is reminiscent of the Tropic palette. I did review the ingredients to verify that it was going to be the same. So if you're familiar with the matte formula in the Tropic palette, that's what you're receiving here in the Safari palette. There's two different formulas per the ingredient list that are listed for the eyeshadow palette, but the only difference between the two is that two of the ingredients are inverted as far as the order in which they appear. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. And I couldn't really find any pattern as to why it would be inverted with regard to color family or anything like that, but I just thought I would mention it. The palette has a 12-month shelf life. It was made in Italy, is cruelty and paraben free, and you can purchase it from Sephora, from natashadenona.com, as well as Beautylish. I do enjoy purchasing from Beautylish. They ship all over the world for free, if I'm not mistaken, and they package everything so beautifully, so I really do enjoy purchasing from them, and they carry a lot of high-end brands, and they're adding new brands every single day. Okay, so as far as the palette, my main disappointment with the palette actually has to be with these shades right here, the shade Rhino, Stone, and Savannah, and the reason why I'm a little bit disappointed is because those palettes are the only green ones that are in the entire palette, and on my skin tone they actually pull a little bit gray. Now I did blend it out with Stone, which is a gray shade, but on other occasions I applied just the shade Rhino and Savannah on their own, and still on top of my olive skin tone they pull a little bit gray. I would have preferred to have seen a little bit more green. Another thing that I wanted to point out with the palette is that there's a lot of kick up. They are not firmly pressed at all, and when you put your brush, no matter how soft, you do get a lot of powder kick up. But interestingly enough, when you apply it to your eye, you're not getting a lot of fallout. The first look that I created, you'll see, I did my eye makeup first, so I was being very careless and I was getting a little bit of fallout, but today, the look that I created, I did so after applying my face makeup, and I was a little bit more cautious in applying it, and I didn't experience any fallout. I had a little bit when I stamped eyeliner on my eyelid, but other than that, there was no fallout with the shades, and that was one of the claims that she mentioned. If powder kick up is something that bothers you in the pan though, you're not gonna like this palette because it does have a lot of powder kick up. Overall, it's a warm neutral eyeshadow palette with the exception of these 4 shades, which have a tendency to pull a little more cool tone. So depending on how you're creating your looks, you may have a problem blending if you try to blend something like Rhino with something a lot more warm, like maybe Masai or something like that. So when I was combining shades like those, I would create a more dramatic look with a very defined partition between the two different shades and not actually try to blend them. And I had a good experience that way. But similar to Subculture, if you try to blend certain of these shades with some of the others, you might have a little bit of a problem blending where they would just basically turn gray or muddy. But if you get away from these shades and use any of the others, they're very harmonious with one another in the palette. Now, given my experience with using these shades, especially the greenish ones, if those were the shades that drew you to the palette, then I wouldn't recommend it for you because, again, my experience is that the color that you see is not necessarily the color that you get on your skin tone. And if you were drawn to these 4 shades, then I wouldn't say that that would be worth $129. On the other hand, if you enjoy the creamy matte formula in the Tropic palette, the matte formula, not the shimmer, then I think you'll actually love this because the eyeshadows are exactly the same. They're really easy to use and the colors give you a very nice wearable look like I'm wearing today. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that this is the most original color story that you might have. If you definitely block out those 4 shades, then you see you have mostly a warm neutral palette and you can create a look like the one that I'm wearing using any palette that you might have. But if you want really nice, good quality, easy to use eyeshadows, then it might be worth the investment for you. When considering all of Natasha Denona's palettes, one thing I would mention is that if you enjoy the Tropic palette, I think you're going to enjoy this one as well. It's very similar and they actually play together so well. Okay, I'm holding up the Tropic palette and the Safari palette, the Safari palette being on top, and you can see that the Safari palette has a lot more depth in the tones of the shades. So I've created really nice looks when combining both palettes. So if you have Tropic, Safari will be a really, really nice companion to it, but you can definitely use it by itself, and in both of the demo looks, I use Safari on its own. Okay, now in general, when considering all of Natasha Denona's palettes, I personally really am a fan of her metallic shades. I think they're beautiful, and this one doesn't have any, so if you are considering this as your first Natasha Denona palette, I wouldn't think it would be a good decision because I would definitely want you to take advantage of trying out her metallic shade. In that situation, I would much sooner recommend the Lila palette, the Sunset palette, or the Star palette. Now, if you are a neutral lover, then it may be best for you to hold on until she releases the Gold palette, which is going to be all neutrals, definitely wearable, and that one is going to have some of the metallic shades. If you like warm tones, Sunset is a beautiful option. If you prefer neutrals, the Star palette is beautiful, and if you like cool tones, I would definitely recommend the Lila palette. That's not to say that this one isn't nice because I actually do like it and I haven't experienced any problems with blending, and I'm not that talented of a makeup artist. I just love makeup. I like to play with it, get creative at times, and this one hasn't given me any trouble and I haven't had to exercise any specific technique. The only thing I would recommend is that you want to use an eyeshadow base that is a little more dry. So I've used it with my MAC paint pot and got good results. I used it with my Tarte Shape Tape and that was great. The Milani eyeshadow base is the one I'm wearing today, but it doesn't work well with something that's more emollient. So for example, the Too Faced Shadow Insurance I found was a little bit too runny and I didn't have as good of a lasting power or as good as a result using that particular eyeshadow base. So if you have it already, play around with the different bases that you're using and you might get a better result. In general, the eyeshadows are very pigmented, and even these 3, which are very light in tone, add a lot of pigment to my eyes. And you'll notice when I do the demo of today's look, and I'll have my hair out of the way so you can see it better, it adds a lot of pigmentation to my eyelid even though they are such light shades. So all of the shadows are really pigmented. They're very blendable. They're creamy like her creamy matte formula, and so I'm very happy with my palette and I would recommend it. But again, take into consideration your preference and how you apply eyeshadows before you spend $129 on your palette. Let's go ahead and get into the demo so that you can see the 2 looks that I created using just this palette. I did one that was more creative and then the one that I'm wearing today. If you're interested in seeing how they perform, if you're not interested in seeing the demos, then I will insert timestamp here so that you can skip ahead to the end of the video. Smith 230 and Malia. I'm just roughly placing that on the upper part of my eye. Same brush and the shade Stone, just a little bit lower. Gus 04 and Savannah. This color is really pigmented. I just dipped my brush once and I'm using the lightest windshield wiper motions to start to create the shape that I want. Once the color is sat down, I'm going to use small circles to begin to blend it out. All that pigment was with one dip of my brush. I'm going to dip again and intensify. Next, with the shade Rhino and a Surratt Smoky Eye brush, this is the Petite, I'm going to darken closest to where I'm going to cut out my crease. I am trying to be as neat as I can with this because I only want to clean up just right underneath that line. And once I establish that gradient, I'm going to take a Smith 235 and I'm just going to blend it out. On the same brush, I'm going to take a little bit of stone and I'm just going to apply that along the upper edges. MAC 249 and my soft ochre paint pot, I'm just going to clean up underneath and you'll see that it'll just be really lightly. I'm not trying to create a sticky base to adhere any metallic shade since this is an all matte look. I'm just trying to clean up right underneath where I wanted the crease to be. Once we have that roughly symmetrical, I'm going to take the shade Malia and a Smith 256 and I'm just going to pack this on the lid. This shade does pack nicely, but it does give me a little bit of fallout. Once that's done, I'm going to take a Smith 203 and the shade Savannah and I'm just going to stamp along that separation line just to make it look a little cleaner. Alright, and there's that part complete. So now I'm going to do the liner. I'm using the shade Masai, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce these names at all. I'm taking a Zoeva 322, which is really a brow brush, and I'm using this to create my wing, which I take all the way up to the gray. And I'm using stamping and sliding motions. I took the inspiration for this look from a Stephanie Lang video. I like to watch her tutorials because she has hooded eyes as well, and so I like to learn from her. I will link her video that she did in the description box in case you want to see it, but she did a similar look with all neutrals and it looked really nice. I wanted to try it. As you can see, I do have a little bit of fallout here from packing that shade on my lid, but now we can remove the tape and hopefully we'll have a straight line. I'm going to add some mascara and we'll be back. Smith 230 and the shade Lotus. I'm applying that all along the lower lash line. Next, Smith 247 and the shade Masai. That's everything I did on the lower lash line. I'm going to use Marc Jacobs Fine Wine Eyeliner and my typical lower lash line mascara. I applied my lipstick. I went through a couple of iterations of things I wanted to try. This is the Rebel Raisin Grande Lips that I got in my BoxyCharm. I did unbox that on my channel. If you are interested in checking out that video, I'll link it in the cards. This is your first look. The next look will be a lot less dramatic. For my first look, I did something a little more creative, so for the second option, I wanted to do something a little bit more for every day. I have primed my eyes. I used the Milani eyeshadow base and I set it down with Glossier's Wowder. Using a Smith 256 brush, I'm going to apply the shade Aya all over the lid and all the way up to the brow bone really. You can see that even though I already had some loose powder, adding this shade does add a lot of pigmentation and coverage as well for the discoloration on my eyelids. Switching off to a Smith 256, which is really a smaller version of the previous brush. Sorry, this is a Smith 253. I'm going to add the shade Malia all the way up to the brow bone. Now I'm using the shade Tamarind and a Smith 230. I finally gathered all my thoughts about the Smith brushes that I purchased, and I have a review coming for you soon. I would sit tight and wait, if you're interested in my advice that is, about the Smith brushes, because there are some definite hits and misses, at least for me. Next, I'm using a Smith 245 and the shade Desert Date, and I'm going to apply that much in the same fashion, just a little bit lower. I'm sorry if my highlight is distracting. I had a little bit of a highlighting mishap, if you will. I was using this one, the Natasha Denona Super Glow Extreme Shine Crystal Highlighting Powder, and clearly she was not kidding. That was extreme. I went way overboard. Next is a Smith 247 and the shade Amhara. I'm going to pat this down first and then begin to blend it into the other shades. In the first demo I did, I was working really carelessly since I did my eye makeup first, since I was doing something a little more elaborate. But you can see now, even though I've done my complexion first, I'm not really experiencing any fallout with these shades. I'm gonna run this shade along my lower lash line as well, but keeping it to the outer third and just connecting it to the top for continuity. Next, I'm using a xoxo brush, and I'm just going to use that on my outer V with the shade Thorn to deepen out just the outer corner and give me a little more depth and definition. Shade Thorn again, and a xoxo brush. I'm going to run that along the lower lash line and keeping it to like about the outer 2/3. I do want to brighten the lid color a little bit, so I'm going in with the Smith 256 and tapping in the shade Aya to brighten that up again. I'm using the palette for a mirror, and man, it's heavy. My arm is getting so tired. That's why I keep this little mirror handy, because those palettes can be really heavy. They're definitely luxurious, but really heavy. The last thing I did was use a Smith 203 brush and the shade Shea, and I'm just stamping that along the upper lash line for an eyeliner look. With these stamping motions, I got just a teensy bit of fallout, and that took care of it. The finishing touches are Wet n Wild Brow Highlighter in the waterline to brighten. I use MAC Giga Black, what is this color? Extended Play Giga Black Lash. It's such a long name, but it's a great mascara for the lower lash line. Stila's Huge Extreme Lash Mascara on the upper lashes, and if you're interested in today's lip color, I'm wearing one of the new Natasha Denona matte lipsticks, the shade number 11 Pink Terra. I'm gonna finish off the look and I will be right back. And here you have your finished look. I hope you liked it. Let me know which look was your favorite, and let's get back to the review. And there you have it. That was everything for my demos. I would love to know which look you preferred. I did intentionally not apply any false lashes so that you could really see the result. One other thing that I wanted to mention with regard to the mattes, I have very watery eyes, and these are holding up really well on the occasions where my eyes just start watering. I don't have really dark patches where the water, as long as it's not too extreme. If I start crying, then yeah, I get those patches, but in general it holds up really well against my watery eyes, and so that was something I also wanted to mention as a positive. So would I recommend the palette? I would, if you enjoy all matte looks and are interested in investing that kind of money on an eyeshadow palette. Now again, as I mentioned before, in all honesty, this color story, if you omit the blue and the greens, is not that unique, and you can definitely create very similar looks using palettes that are in a more affordable price range. So of course that's for you to decide. That's everything for this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to give me a big thumbs up. Leave any questions that you might have in the comment section and I will answer them as best as I can if it was something I didn't touch upon in the video. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your day with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again on my next video really soon. Bye-bye.